Mommy, can we get a gelato after we find your shoes? Please. Julie looks down at her daughter, forcing a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. The kind of smile you wear when you're constantly checking over your shoulder. Yes, baby. Promise. Let's just get the sneakers first. I never thought a Saturday afternoon at the Grand Galleria would be the day the world stopped for me. My daughter was practically skipping beside me, her little hand gripping mine as we walked past the marble fountain. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted coffee, the scent of a normal life. Then I saw him. Lonzo. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order in my purse was a crisp, folded promise of safety, but as he pushed through the crowd, I realized that to a man like him, paper is just something you tear. He had that look, the one that usually preceded a trip to the emergency room. The look that said I was a possession he wasn't finished breaking yet. Julie! His voice sliced through the mall's ambient music like a serrated blade. I tried to turn to run, but fear is a heavy weight. His hand didn't just grab me. It hooked into my hair and the collar of my blazer, and suddenly the world tilted. The cold marble of the floor rushed up to meet my cheek. I felt the burn of the stone as he dragged me, the screech of my shoes against the floor echoing like a scream. My daughter's voice rose in a frantic, high-pitched wail. Daddy, stop! Please, you're hurting her. Stop! Around us, the world froze. People didn't help. They drifted back like a receding tide, pulling out their phones to record the content. I was drowning in plain sight. But then, through a blur of tears and golden hair, I saw him. He was standing 15 feet away, framed by the entrance of a designer boutique. A man in a midnight black suit. His silhouette sharp and immovable. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't reaching for a phone. With a chilling rhythmic precision, he began to adjust the silver watch on his left wrist. As Alonzo pulled back his fist to strike, the man in the suit looked directly at me. His eyes weren't full of pity. They were full of a cold, calculating assessment. He reached up and began to crack his knuckles, one by one, the sound snapping through the air like a death knell for my husband's arrogance. The predator had just met the apex. The sound of the knuckles cracking was rhythmic, like the steady ticking of a clock counting down the seconds of Alonzo's reign of terror. Alonzo didn't hear it at first. He was too drunk on his own adrenaline, his fingers tightening in my hair as he prepared to scream another insult. But the crowd felt it. A heavy, suffocating silence swept through the corridor, the kind of stillness that precedes a lightning strike. Let her go. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of a gavel slamming down in a silent courtroom. Alonzo paused, his head snapping up, his face contorting into a snarl as he faced the man in the midnight suit. Mind your own business, pal, Alonzo spat, trying to bolster his courage. This is family business. She's mine. Marco Ricci didn't flinch. He didn't even stop his steady, measured pace. He finished adjusting his watch, a gleaming silver piece that caught the mall's fluorescent lights, and let his hands drop to his sides. I don't see a family here, Marco said, his tone conversational yet chillingly sharp. I see a coward dragging a woman across a floor, and I find it distasteful. Alonzo let go of my collar, but only to lunge forward, fueled by the ego that had kept me in a cage for years. He swung a wild, clumsy fist. I gasped, reaching out for my daughter, shielding her eyes against the violence I knew was coming. But the impact I expected never happened. With a movement so fluid it looked rehearsed, Marco stepped inside the arc of Alonzo's punch. He caught Alonzo's wrist with one hand and with the other, delivered a precise open palm strike to his chest that sent my husband staggering back 5 feet. Before Alonzo could find his footing, Marco was on him. There was no theatrical brawl, no wasted energy. Marco delivered a sharp, tactical blow to Alonzo's solar plexus, followed by a strike to the jaw that made an audible crack echo off the storefront windows. Alonzo collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. He lay on the marble, gasping for air, the rugged, tough guy facade dissolving into pathetic whimpers. Marco didn't look at the crowd, and he didn't look at the phone still recording. He stepped over Alonso's prone body as if it were nothing more than a piece of discarded trash. He knelt in front of me, the fabric of his expensive trousers pressing into the floor I had just been dragged across. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Up close, his eyes weren't just cold. They were an ancient, stormy gray. I'm okay," I whispered, my voice trembling as I pulled my sobbing daughter into my lap. "Thank you." Marco looked at my daughter, his expression softening for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that looked like grief. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white linen handkerchief, offering it to me to wipe the dust and tears from my face. "He won't touch you again," Marco said, his voice dropping to a low, vibrating frequency that felt like a vow. "Not here. Not anywhere." He stood up and looked at the mall security guards who were finally jogging toward us. He didn't run. He didn't look worried. He simply straightened his cuffs and waited, radiating an authority that made the guards slow to a halt before they even reached him. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just been saved. I had been claimed by a shadow far more powerful than the man who had tried to break me. "Would you like me to proceed with the next chapter, where Julie's family warns her about the true nature of Marco Ricci?" The smell of antiseptic and cheap coffee filled my sister's small kitchen, a stark contrast to the lingering scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco that had clung to the handkerchief Marco Ricci gave me. My hands were still shaking as I reached for a mug, the ceramic clinking rhythmically against the counter. Across the table, my sister Elena and my mother sat in a heavy, suffocating silence, their eyes darting between me and the news playing on a muted television screen. "Julie, do you have any idea who that man is?" Elena's voice was a frantic whisper, stripped of its usual warmth. She leaned forward, sliding a tablet across the table. The screen showed a grainy photo of Marco Ricci leaving a courthouse, looking every bit the sovereign king of a world I didn't want to understand. "That's not just a good Samaritan. That's Marco Ricci. People call him the ghost of the North End." I looked at the screen, then at the faint purple marks beginning to bloom on my arm where Alonso had gripped me. "He saved us, Elena." "He didn't have to, but he did." "He didn't save you for free, Julie," my mother interjected, her voice cracked with an old, deep-seated fear. She lived through the years when the Ricci name meant closed shops and families disappearing in the night. Men like him don't move without a reason. In his world, everything is a transaction. You've traded a rabid dog for a wolf, and you don't even see the teeth yet. She began to list the rules of the Ricci world like a grim litany. Rule 1. Nothing is ever forgotten. Rule 2. Loyalty is the only currency. Rule 3. Once you are under the wing of the Ricci family, you belong to the family. They spoke of the Ricci reputation, a legacy built on a terrifying brand of justice that bypassed the police and the courts. They told me that by accepting his help, I had stepped off the map of the civilized world and into a shadow kingdom where Marco was the judge, jury, and executioner. "Alonso is a monster, yes," Elena said, her eyes pleading. "But he's a monster the police can eventually lock up. Marco Ricci. He's the kind of power that makes the police look the other way. If you let him stay in your life, you're playing a game where the rules are written in blood. You have to take the girl and go to the shelter. Don't call him. Don't thank him. Just disappear." I looked out the window at the dark street. For the first time in years, there was no black sedan belonging to Alonso idling at the curb. Instead, I noticed a sleek silver SUV parked a block away, its headlights dark, its presence silent and watchful. I thought about the way Marco had adjusted his watch before stepping into the line of fire, the calm precision of his movements, and the strange, haunting sadness in his eyes when he looked at my daughter. My family saw a criminal, a titan of the underworld who moved people like chess pieces. But I remembered the weight of the white linen handkerchief in my hand, and the way the air had seemed to settle into a peaceful, protected stillness the moment he spoke. My mother and sister were terrified of the rules of his world, but as I touched the bruises on my neck, I realized I had been living by Alonso's rules for a lifetime. Alonso's rules were chaos and pain. Marco's rules, however dark, seemed to be built on something I hadn't felt in years. Order. I didn't know if I was trading one cage for another, but as the silver SUV outside pulled slowly away to circle the block again, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't ready to let go of the first man who had ever made me feel like I was worth defending. The silver SUV was still there the next evening, idling like a patient predator at the edge of the park where I had taken my daughter to escape the suffocating walls of my sister's kitchen. I stood by the swings, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when the rear door opened. Marco Ricci stepped out, looking less like a phantom of the underworld and more like a man burdened by the weight of a heavy coat. He didn't approach with a swagger. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly how much space he was allowed to take. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, stopping several feet away. His eyes scanning the perimeter before settling on me. The coldness I had seen at the mall was gone, replaced by a weariness that made him look human. "My family says I should be afraid of you," I told him, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. "They say your protection is just another kind of debt." Marco looked toward the playground where my daughter was laughing, her small silhouette framed by the orange glow of twilight. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He didn't hand it to me. He held it as if the paper itself were made of glass. 15 years ago, I had a world like yours," he began, his voice dropping to a low, rough vibration. "A wife who liked to shop on Saturday afternoons. A daughter who always asked for a treat before we went home. I was young, arrogant. I thought my name alone was a shield that could protect them from the life I chose." He looked down at the photograph, his thumb tracing the edge. "I was wrong. A rival family wanted to send a message. They didn't come for me. They waited until I was stuck in a meeting miles away, while my family walked through a parking garage. I heard the sirens from my office. By the time I arrived, the world was quiet. Too quiet. The air between us grew cold, the kind of chill that comes from a grave." Marco turned his gaze back to me, and for the first time I saw the ghost my sister had spoken of. Not a man of malice, but a man haunted by a failure he could never outrun. "When I saw you at that mall," he continued, his jaw tightening, "I didn't see a stranger. I saw the moment I failed my own blood. I saw the hands of a coward around the throat of a woman who just wanted to buy sneakers for her child. I couldn't save them, Julie. But I can save you. And I can ensure that man never breathes the same air as your daughter again." He tucked the photo back into his pocket, his expression hardening back into the mask of the Ricci king. "This isn't a debt. It's an obsession. I am a man who has everything but the one thing that matters. The chance to change the past. Protecting you is the only way I can live with the ghosts." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that my mother was wrong. He wasn't a wolf looking for a transaction. He was a survivor who had built an empire of shadows just to make sure he'd never be powerless again. As he turned to walk back to the SUV, I didn't feel the urge to run. Instead, I felt a strange, terrifying sense of relief. I wasn't just a victim he had stumbled upon. I was his second chance, and I knew with a chilling certainty that Marco Ricci would burn the entire city to the ground before he let me experience a moment of the silence he had described. The following Monday, I sat in the cramped break room of the dental office, staring at a lukewarm cup of coffee and waiting for the phone to ring. I expected the usual. A call from my court-appointed advocate warning me that Alonso's lawyer had found a technicality, or that the restraining order violation was being downgraded to a simple misdemeanor. That was the rhythm of my life. 1 step forward, 2 steps back into the dark. But when the phone finally buzzed against the laminate tabletop, the voice on the other end wasn't trembling with excuses. It was my lawyer, sounding breathless and bewildered. "Julie, I don't know what happened," he began, the rustle of papers audible in the background. "Alonso's defense team just withdrew their motion for bail. And the district attorney. They aren't offering a plea deal anymore. They've upgraded the charges to felony assault with a sentencing enhancement for the presence of a minor. They're going for the maximum, Julie. 8 years. I leaned back against the refrigerator, the hum of the machine vibrating through my spine. In the 3 years I had been trying to use the law to protect myself, I had met nothing but closed doors and insufficient evidence. Now, suddenly, the doors weren't just open. They were being ripped off their hinges. There's more, the lawyer continued. The mall security footage, the high-definition angles that the mall manager claimed were malfunctioning last week. A courier delivered them to the DA's desk this morning. The footage is crystal clear. Shows every second of him dragging you. It even shows the alcoholic tremors in his hands. I knew then that this wasn't luck. It was the silent hand. I thought of Marco Ricci, adjusting his silver watch with that same terrifyingly calm precision. He didn't need to shout or throw punches to move the world. He simply whispered, and the gears of the city ground in a different direction. He hadn't just saved me at the mall. He was systematically dismantling the legal maze that Alonzo had used to trap me for years. Later that evening, as I walked to my car, I found a small, cream-colored envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. There was no name, no return address. Inside, a single line was written in elegant, heavy ink. The evidence will speak when you cannot. Sleep without the light on tonight. A chill that wasn't entirely unpleasant swept over me. For the first time, the weight of the law didn't feel like a yoke around my neck. It felt like a shield being held by a giant. My family had warned me that Marco's world was built on blood and transactions, but as I drove home through streets that suddenly felt safer, I realized that for a woman who had been ignored by every proper authority, there was a profound, addictive beauty in the way a shadow could command the light. Alonzo was no longer a predator. He was a file on a desk, a man whose loopholes had been cauterized by a power he couldn't even name. I looked into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the silver SUV. It wasn't there, but the air in the car felt thick with a quiet, invisible protection. The ghost of the North End was keeping his word, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't just hope for justice, I expected it. Would you like to move on to Chapter 5, where Alonzo's associates attempt to retaliate, only to find Marco's men waiting? The sense of peace was short-lived, a fragile glass ornament shattered by the vibration of my phone. It was a photo from an unknown number, a grainy shot of my daughter through the chain-link fence of her school playground. No text followed. None was needed. Alonzo's world was a hydra. Even with the main head behind bars, the smaller, uglier heads, his cousins and the men he drank with, were still thrashing. They wanted me to know that while Marco Ricci might own the mall, they owned the streets where I lived. I was standing in my kitchen, the air suddenly turning to ice in my lungs, when a heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the front porch. It wasn't a knock, it was the sound of something or someone hitting the wood. I rushed to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting to see Alonzo's brother with a brick or a bottle. Instead, I saw a scene that looked like a choreographed snapshot of a war I hadn't realized was being fought. Two men I had never seen before, rugged, wearing heavy work jackets, were being pinned against the brick siding of my house. Holding them there were 3 men in tailored overcoats, their faces as expressionless as stone. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. One of Marco's men held a phone up to the face of the man who had sent me the photo, his voice a low, melodic growl that drifted through the glass. "You took a picture of the wrong child," the man in the overcoat said. "And now you're going to delete it. Then, you're going to tell everyone who sent you that the perimeter of this house is no longer part of your world. It belongs to the Ricci family." There was no shouting, no flashy display of weapons, just the raw, overwhelming presence of a power that made Alonzo's associates look like children playing with matches. One of the intruders started to protest, a snarl forming on his lips, but a short, sharp movement from Marco's lead man silenced him instantly. It wasn't a fight. It was a correction. I saw a black sedan pull up to the curb, and the rear window rolled down just an inch. I couldn't see his face, but I saw the glint of a silver watch and the faint trail of smoke from a luxury cigar. Marco didn't step out. He didn't need to. He was the architect, watching his blueprint for my safety being executed in real time. Within minutes, the intruders were ushered into their own vehicle and escorted away by a second car that seemed to appear out of the shadows. The street returned to its eerie, suburban silence. The man who had led the intervention turned toward my window. He didn't wave or smile. He simply gave a single respectful nod before stepping into the shadows of the large oak tree across the street. I looked down at my phone. The message was gone. The thread had been deleted from the server side. Another glitch in the system courtesy of the silent hand. The fear that had lived in the base of my spine for years began to transform into something else. It was a dark, heavy realization that I was no longer an easy target. I was no longer the woman who had to hide in the bathroom and pray the door held. I was being guarded by a man who treated my safety as a matter of professional pride. My family called it a debt, and perhaps they were right. But as I tucked my daughter into bed that night, knowing the ghost was standing watch in the dark, I realized that I would rather owe my life to a king than lose it to a coward. The courtroom was a cavern of cold oak and hushed whispers, a place where I had previously felt small, ignored, and disposable. But today the air felt different. As I walked toward the witness stand, the clicking of my heels didn't sound like a woman fleeing. It sounded like a soldier marching. I kept my gaze fixed forward, refusing to look at the defense table where Alonzo sat, stripped of his bravado and wearing a suit that didn't fit his slumped shoulders. I took my seat and felt the familiar surge of panic, the ghost of a hand around my throat, the memory of the mall floor's grit against my skin. My breath hitched. Then I looked toward the back of the room. He was there. Marco Ricci sat in the very last row, a solitary figure in a dark charcoal suit. He didn't nod and he didn't smile. He simply sat with his hands resting calmly on his knees, his silver watch glinting under the gallery lights. He looked like an anchor dropped into a turbulent sea. Just seeing him there, a silent sentinel who had moved mountains to ensure this day arrived, allowed the air to return to my lungs. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. I looked directly at Alonzo. For the first time, he was the one who looked away. "My name is Julie Anderson," I began, my voice clear and unwavering. I didn't stumble. I didn't cry. I told the court about the years of shadows, the broken promises, and the afternoon at the mall where I thought I would take my last breath in front of my daughter. I spoke about the terror of a restraining order that was treated like a suggestion. As I spoke, I realized I wasn't just testifying against a man. I was testifying against the version of myself that believed I deserved to be hurt. Alonzo's lawyer tried to poke holes in my memory, tried to suggest I had provoked him, but every time the pressure mounted, I glanced back at the man in the last row. Marco's presence was a physical weight, a reminder that the world of technicalities and misunderstandings had been burned away. The high-definition footage Marco had recovered played on the monitors, making the truth undeniable. When the judge finally spoke, the silence in the room was absolute. "The evidence of your cruelty is as clear as the scars you left on this family's peace," the judge said, looking at Alonzo with visible disdain. "I sentence you to the maximum term of 8 years in state prison, without the possibility of early release." The gavel hit the wood with a finality that vibrated through the floorboards. Alonzo was led away in handcuffs, his metallic clinking a pathetic echoes of the fear he used to inspire. I stayed in the chair for a moment, the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights finally lifting off my chest. When I stood up and walked out of the courtroom, Marco was waiting in the hallway. He didn't offer a celebratory speech. He merely stepped aside to let me pass, his eyes acknowledging the strength it took for me to stand on that platform. "It's over, Julie," he said softly as we reached the courthouse steps. "No," I replied, looking out at the city skyline, no longer feeling like a victim in hiding. "It's just beginning." The sun was out, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't look at the shadows to see who was following me. I looked at them to see who was standing by my side. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse had closed on the past, but the transition into the light felt dizzying. A week after the sentencing, a sleek black town car arrived at my sister's house. There was no demand, only an invitation. A small card embossed with a silver R, and an address to a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the harbor. When I arrived, the space was empty of other patrons, the city lights shimmering against the floor-to-ceiling glass like a sea of fallen stars. Marco was already there, standing by the railing. He had traded his charcoal suit for a softer dark sweater, though the silver watch still anchored his wrist. The table was set with simple elegance: white linen, a single candle, and a meal that smelled of garlic and home. "You look like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop," Marco said softly as he pulled out my chair. His voice lacked its usual command. It sounded almost tentative. "I'm waiting for the bill, Marco," I admitted, my fingers tracing the edge of the silk napkin. In my experience, when a man builds a fortress around a woman, he eventually wants to be the one who keeps the key. My mother. She calls this a transaction. Marco sat across from me, the candlelight casting deep shadows across the lines of his face. He didn't look offended. He looked like a man who had heard that specific fear many times before. He poured a dark red wine into 2 glasses, his movements steady. "Ownership is for men who are afraid of losing what they have," he said, his gray eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. "Alonso wanted to own you because he was small. He needed to break you to feel tall. That is not what this is." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the table, the same hands that had cracked their knuckles in the mall and delivered justice in the shadows. "I didn't step in that day to change your master, Julie. I stepped in because the world is a dark place, and occasionally, it is a man's honor to stand between the darkness and something worth cherishing. I don't want to be your cage. I want to be the ground beneath your feet so you can finally reach for the things you had to drop when you were running." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. For years, love had been a word used to justify bruises and excuses. But as Marco spoke about honor and the dignity of protection, I realized he was offering me something I hadn't even known to ask for: the freedom to be vulnerable without being a victim. "I don't need you to belong to me," he continued, his voice a low, soothing vibration. "I need you to belong to yourself again. My protection isn't a debt you pay back. It's a gift I give myself because seeing you and your daughter walk through this city without fear, that is the only thing that silences my ghosts." We ate in the quiet glow of the city, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to check the exits. I looked at the man across from me, a man of shadows who spoke of light with a poet's heart. He wasn't asking for my submission. He was asking for my trust. And as the city lights twinkled behind him, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just being saved. I was being seen. Would you like to move on to Chapter 8, where Marco reveals the new home and the path to Julie's future? The drive away from the city center was quiet, the neon pulse of the harbor fading into the soft, amber glow of a tree-lined neighborhood I had only ever seen from the windows of a bus. Marco steered the car with one hand, his expression unreadable, though there was a new lightness in the way he moved. We pulled up to a row of elegant brick townhouses, their black shutters and brass knockers gleaming under the street lamps. He killed the engine and reached into the center console, pulling out a heavy leather-bound folder and a single brass key. He didn't hand them to me immediately. He held them with a quiet solemnity. "I spent years watching people lose everything because they didn't have a foundation," Marco said, his voice reflecting the low hum of the night. "Alonso knew that as long as you were struggling to pay rent, as long as you were one paycheck away from the street, you were always within his reach. He used your survival against you." He placed the key in my palm. His weight felt impossible. "This is yours. The deed is in your name, held through a trust that no one, not your ex-husband's family, not a private investigator, can trace. It's a fortress, Julie. But more than that, it's a home." I looked at the house, my throat tightening. For years, home had been a place where I slept with my back against the door, listening for the sound of a key that shouldn't be turning. Now I was looking at a place with a garden for my daughter and a fence that meant peace. "I can't afford this, Marco," I whispered, the old fear of debt rising like a ghost. The taxes, the upkeep. My salary at the office won't even cover the heat. Marco opened the leather folder. Inside weren't just property papers. He flipped to a page with the official seal of the state's premier medical institute. My name was printed there, followed by a confirmed enrollment for the Advanced Dental Hygiene and Periodontal Certification Program. You're a receptionist because you needed a job that paid today, Marco said, his eyes softening as they met mine. But I've seen the way you study those textbooks during your lunch break. I've seen the notes you hide in your purse. Your tuition is paid in full. There is a stipend for your living expenses until you graduate. I'm not giving you a handout, Julie. I'm giving you the time you were robbed of. I touched the embossed paper, my vision blurring. He wasn't just giving me a roof. He was giving me a career, a future, and the dignity of standing on my own 2 feet. He was systematically removing every string Alonzo had ever used to pull me back. Why? I asked, a single tear finally escaping. Marco reached out, his thumb catching the tear before it could fall. Because a woman like you shouldn't have to spend her life being brave just to exist. I want to see what you can build when you aren't busy trying to survive the wreckage. As I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, the key felt warm in my hand. I looked back at Marco, who remained by the car, a shadow of protection in the night. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim being rescued. I felt like a woman being restored. I turned the lock, and as the door swung open to a hallway that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, I realized that the greatest gift he had given me wasn't the house. It was the permission to dream. Would you like me to write the final chapter, where the promise ring seals their future and Julie finally finds her peace? The seasons turned, and for the first time in my life, the changing weather didn't signal a new season of hiding. My daughter had grown taller, her laughter now a permanent fixture in the hallways of our townhouse, and my hands, once perpetually trembling, were steady as I completed my final clinical rotations. The shadow that had once followed us was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable security that lived in the presence of the men who still watched over our perimeter, and the man who had become the center of my world. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Marco took us to the same park where he had once shared the story of the family he couldn't save. The orange and gold leaves crunched beneath our boots as we walked toward our bench. My daughter ran ahead, her bright coat a splash of color against the gray sky as she chased a squirrel. We sat in a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between two people who no longer need to explain their scars. Marco took my hand, his fingers tracing the palm that had once clawed at a cold mall floor. "The day I saw you being hurt," he said softly, his voice a low, rough vibration that still had the power to stop my heart. Something inside me woke up. I thought I was a man who only knew how to survive the past. You and your daughter showed me I could still fight for a future. "You saved us, Marco," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. "You saved me from more than just Alonzo. You saved me from the belief that I was alone." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it with a flourish. He held it with the same reverence he had shown the photograph of his lost family. "I'm not asking you to marry me today," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that promised a lifetime. "You are still healing. You are still building the woman you were meant to be before the world tried to break you. I want you to have your own life, your own success, and your own voice." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, a thin band of white gold holding a single, flawless sapphire the color of a midnight sky. It was beautiful, but it wasn't a shackle. It was a beacon. "This is a promise," Marco said, sliding the ring onto my finger. "A promise that the fear is over. I am not your master, and I am not your cage. I am your partner. And until you are ready for more, let this be the sign that you and the girl are my family now. And I protect my family always." I looked down at the ring, the deep blue stone reflecting the strength of the man beside me. Then I looked at my daughter, who was waving at us from the slide, her face lit with a joy that was pure and unburdened. For the first time I wasn't afraid of the future, because the future was no longer a place I had to navigate through a minefield. I had been grabbed by the throat by a man who wanted to destroy me, but I had been claimed by a man who chose to rebuild my entire world. As the sun set, casting long, peaceful shadows over the park, I realized that real protection doesn't look like control. It looks like consistency. It looks like honor. And as Marco pulled me closer, I finally knew what it felt like to be truly safely home.